listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I'm your host, Alan Peterson, a lifelong fan of the genre and a thriller writer myself, and you're listening to episode number 241. Before we get started, if you enjoy the show, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast app. It really helps other mystery and thriller fans discover the show. And if you're looking for your next twisty read, be sure to check out my latest psychological thriller, The Ones You Know, now available on Amazon. You can learn more at thrillingreads.com/ones. Today, I'm joined by author Tom Towslee. Before turning to fiction, Tom built an impressive career as a newspaper and wire service reporter before serving as a communications director and press secretary for both a United States senator and a state governor. Drawing on those experiences, he writes crime, mystery, and suspense novels filled with authentic characters, real-world detail, and plenty of twists. Tom is the author of the John Standard series, the Northwest Noir books, and several standalone novels. His latest release, Finding Lexi Divine, came out in April and continues his tradition of writing suspense that's both grounded and compelling. So in this episode, we'll talk about Tom's journey from journalism to fiction, his writing process, the inspiration behind Finding Lexi Divine, and much more. So here is my conversation with Tom Towslee. Tom, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I did want to mention, we actually connected under some unusual circumstances. A scammer was impersonating me on the podcast, reached out to a number of other authors. You know, you have a fascinating background in journalism and politics, and so I figured let's get you on the show for real.
Well, it was very generous of you to take pity on me, who came very close to getting scammed. But I'm much wiser for the experience, and it turned out great. So I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So you have an incredible background. So you spent years as a reporter and you later worked in political communications. So just kind of curious, at what point did you decide that you wanted to write novels instead of covering other people's stories?
Well, you know, when I was a young reporter at a small town newspaper, I had an editor who introduced me to Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett and Earl Durr Biggers and Nago Marsh. And so I started reading those, and I just, thought, well, when I ever get a chance, I'm gonna take a shot at this and see what happens. After I left journalism, I had a little more extra time on my hands, and I started writing. It was a rocky start. I tried self-publishing. That didn't work out at all. I'm sure self-publishing is much better now than it was when I tried it, but it was a really bad experience. But eventually I found an agent, found a publisher. 9 books later, here we are.
What can a reader expect when they pick up one of your books?
They're going to find a protagonist. Well, I think like all protagonists in mystery fiction, they're damaged in some way. Some are drunks, some are just cynical. Mine have just had a series of bad luck. Found their way out of it, but they came out of it with a certain sense of fallibility about themselves. One of my friends who read my book said all of my characters are disenfranchised knights, which I thought was an interesting term I had to look up. But yeah. The latest protagonist is a guy named Charlie Doyle, who is a suspended cop who, in order to make ends meet, was hired to find a missing stripper and uncovers a drug conspiracy on the way.
Your other books in the John Standard series, he was a freelance journalist. You are a journalist. Is that based on you?
Well, I'm sure you get this same question. What is Eli Shaw you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is John Standard me? I don't know how you write a book without putting some of your, self into certain characters.
Mm-hmm.
John Standard was, actually my first and my favorite protagonist. He started out in Portland, Oregon as a freelancer who had lost his job at the daily newspaper and was trying to make ends meet. Through the course of the book, he makes a little money. About that time, I was vacationing in Mexico. Now, your book, Gringo Gulch, Zihuatanejo also has a Gringo Gulch, but it's not the red light district. It's a street that leads from the hotel district into town. And I'd walk that street every day. And at the end of the street, it takes a fork. And if you go to the left, you have to walk by all these restaurants with the waiters with their menus offering the best food in Mexico. Or if you take the right, you kind of go into town. And you walk by a hotel with a sign outside that says, "We speak Canadian." And you walk a little further and you find a bar with a sign out front that says, "Cold friggin' beer." And all of them are filled with these memorable characters. And I said, well, let's just move John Standard to Mexico. And I did, and he stayed there for 4 more books.
Oh, that's great. So yes, very, very, very similar to the expat community that I grew up with. Very, like you said, very interesting characters that you find out there.
They are. They are.
And so I'm also curious because now you worked in government as well. So you've worked closely with elected officials and public figures. So I'm kind of wondering how that experience also has given you more of a perspective on power and secrets. I mean, we all hear about that stuff on the outside, but you're like actually the inside. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that makes it into your books and how real it is, what we hear in the news?
I have not. Well, I wrote one book called Graves Point, which is set in a small town on the Oregon coast. And it's probably as close as I ever got to a true mystery, a true murder mystery. And the character in that book was an aide to a United States senator who becomes sort of disillusioned by the political process and decides to flee back to his hometown. And while he's there, he uncovers a mystery that goes back to his teenage years. So, yeah, there was a little bit of that in there. A political scandal of sorts, usually involving, I think it involved campaign finance. But that's about as close as I got. I never wanted to be, telling tales out of school. The two politicians I worked for are still friends, and I still talk to them, and I still hear from them. And so I kept an arm's distance from all of that.
And so we talked a little bit about fighting Lexi Divine. Can you tell us a little bit about that then? Like what's the, you mentioned about the a cop that's been suspended, but can you tell us a little bit about the story and how that all came together for you?
Like I say, he was suspended for planting drugs on a drug dealer. So he sets out to try to make some money. He does some work for a bail bondsman. And then he's hired by this sketchy character to find this missing stripper named Lexi Divine. So he tracks her down in a small town on the Oregon coast. And I should say on the coast because I never really identify where it is. The people who are looking for her show up, and things turn bloody at that point. And she leaves. He comes back to the city, and with a name, and the name is a local wealthy rug dealer. And turns out he's not only importing rugs from Afghanistan, but they're stuffed with drugs. So it kind of goes from there. This guy is a very amoral character. Charlie Doyle, very amoral. He hates scumbags, but he's a very loyal friend. He's pretty indiscriminate about who he kills. Doesn't think too much about it. There's a couple of interesting chapters when he talks with his psychiatrist.
Oh, so he's trying to get help at least, right?
Well, he has to be part of his suspension requires him to go to a psychiatrist.
Yeah, it's always so fascinating that those characters, like we see that with Michael Connolly and Rudy Bosch and all that. Is that what's the balance for you on that? Because, like you said, he's no saint, he's an amoral character, but we want to root for him. Is that something that you think about when you're writing these, where you're thinking about these characters?
Yeah, I would say that this particular character would be a cross between Dirty Harry and Harry Bosch. He's hell on people who he thinks are criminals, but he's a very, very loyal friend and a bit of a loner. His best friend was a ex-boxer who is killed by an incompetent cop. That theme sort of runs through the whole book of how he misses his friend and how he weaves this cop into his revenge against the drug dealers.
I was kind of curious. I was looking at your books. So you've written these standalone novels. You've also written series fiction.
Right.
Kind of curious, what do you enjoy writing more? Do you enjoy like a starting a whole new characters every time, or continuing a series?
Well, if you read the John Standard series, the last book is called appropriately "The Last Masterpiece," and it has somewhat of an ambiguous ending. But as far as I was concerned, I retired John Standard, and I went off and wrote what my publisher and I agreed we would call Northwest Noir.
Hmm.
There's three books: Graves Point, The Shattered Man, and Crazy Never Dies, and they're all set in the Pacific Northwest. And after that, I started thinking about this character Charlie Doyle, and I think strippers are sort of a reoccurring character in my book. Because somebody asked me why, and I said, well, it's a good way to introduce sex into a book without getting anatomical. It is, and the research is fun as well.
In your other books on these Northwest Noirs, do they all feature Charlie Doyle, or is it different characters?
Different characters, but overlapping locations.
Okay, got it. So the location is like the anchor of the series.
Right, right.
Yeah.
In the book Graves Point, a lot of people. I actually did a book club, and the women who read it. I don't know why book clubs are all women. I don't know why there's no men book clubs, but they got really deep into this character, and they were telling me things about him that even I didn't think of. And he like I say, he's sort of on the run. People are chasing him. He knows too much about a political scandal. People are trying to kill him. At the same time, he's trying to unravel a mystery. And one of them said that they thought that the location was really the true character of the book. And I don't think I've ever heard that before, where a location can be as important as characters.
Yeah, that whole area too, the Pacific Northwest up there, it's so with the clouds and the rain and all the serial killers that seem to hang out in that area.
Now, we'll keep telling you that. Keeps the riffraff out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you've now published what you said 9 novels now. You have
Yeah.
belt. Kind of curious, looking back on that. What do you think you've learned about your storytelling since you wrote your first book till the latest?
Well, a piece of advice I got early on from a fellow reporter of mine who was also a novelist said, know how your book starts, know how it ends, and have fun getting from one to the other. So I always try to know how the book is going to end. Now, I can't say that that's been true 100% of the time. Sometimes I don't know the end till I get to the end. But I try not to do that because you want to leave Easter eggs along the way and drop, clues and hints. That's been basically my rule is know how your book ends. Try to make something happen in every chapter. I don't have any throwaway chapters. I try to move the plot along. I think my journalism training makes my writing pretty sparse. If you're going to learn anything about my characters, you're going to learn them by what they do and maybe a little bit about what they say. But there's not going to be any inner discussions and inner struggles that are going to come out in the book. You're going to see that through their actions, not through their emotions.
And also with your background in journalism, what's your research process like? Do you do a lot of research on these books or not really?
Certainly not as much as you do about the criminal justice system in Costa Rica. But yeah, to a certain extent, yes. But I'm writing about locations that I know about. And the characters are pretty fully formed in my mind. I'm not a police procedural kind of guy. I think there's enough of those out there. Even my character Charlie Doyle, who's a cop, although a suspended one, doesn't really like fellow cops. He doesn't like their sense of humor. He doesn't like the way they dress. He doesn't like anything about them.
Now, get into your writing process. Getting a little nosy here. So, what's a typical day for you? I know it's kind of hard to ask a writer about a typical day, but do you write every day? Do you have set hours? Do you write from the same spot?
Well, I write from the same spot. I try not to consider, I've had enough jobs, so I try not to make my writing a job. I write to the point where I'm writing, and then suddenly I realize I'm not writing, I'm just typing. And I just walk away for a while. I'll spend more time thinking about plots and thinking about characters than I will actually writing. But once I get it in my head, it goes pretty fast. But like I say, I don't have a set schedule. And I have plenty of time to write, but my wife keeps me busy, so it's either while she's playing tennis or late at night, one of the two.
And what do you use to write your books? Do you use like Microsoft Word or something else?
Yeah, Microsoft Word.
So what's been the biggest surprise that you've encountered since you started publishing your books?
Trying to sell them.
Yeah, that's always like, that's half the battle, isn't it?
Early on, one of my greatest achievements was selling a book to somebody I didn't know.
Do you do like shows and stuff? Do you go to book shows and all that stuff?
I
Conferences?
don't. I
Yeah.
don't. I tell you, I'm not a very outgoing person. I was very good at marketing the people I worked for, but I'm not very good at marketing myself. And I just find the whole idea of going to book shows or, I've done a couple of book clubs, and those were fine. My wife belongs to a book club, and they've actually read a couple of my books, which I was totally amazed at. So I think out of the 9 I wrote, her book club has done 2.
Yeah. Were you a little nervous? Were you more nervous than the other ones?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, she's an English. She has a master's in English.
Oh wow, yeah.
In English lit. My stuff is God bless her. She reads it, but I know it's hard for her. It's not Emily Bronte. you know. So I appreciate that she reads them, and sometimes we quibble over grammar and usage, but most of the time that was the early on. That was a big problem was proofreading, but now with this publisher that I have, discovering that function of read out loud
Hmm.
has helped a lot, and now AI has helped enormously as well.
Yeah, that's good. Like your own little personal development editor before you go send it to your editors and stuff. It helps clean things up a little bit, huh?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. But there's been some embarrassing moments. I have to admit.
Oh, I'm about to ask. Can you
Well,
share
just
one?
just submitting the manuscript before it was ready to be submitted, and having to pull it back and say, "Listen, I'm sorry, I pulled the trigger here a little early."
Oh yeah,
But,
yeah. We've all done that before too. We get a little too eager ahead of ourselves.
exactly.
So this is something that I always ask my guests too, because I have aspiring writers that listen to the podcast. What advice you have to someone who's listened to this, thinking about writing on their first book?
Well, I was fortunate in that I was never afraid to write. I was never afraid that somebody was going to read it. When you work for United Press International, you write a story and you press a button and it goes out. It could eventually find itself to the world.
Mhm.
While I was working for UPI, I covered the Rajneeshis, and everything I wrote about the Rajneeshis ended up on the international wire, and I would get clips from all over the world. I learned that you just can't be afraid to press that button. And a lot of people tell me, well, I don't like to write because I'm afraid somebody's going to read it, and I tell them, screw them. Writing is like fingerprints. Everybody has a different way of writing. I mean, you can read all the Raymond Chandler and all the Dashiell Hammett you want, but you're never going to write like that. You're going to write like yourself. And one of my old bosses, a United States senator, he wanted to write a book. And I said, well, Senator, you don't have anything to say. And he said, yeah, you're right. Years later, he wrote a book, and he did have something to say, and it was good. It was
Yes,
good. But at the time,
he
he
had to
didn't have
wait.
anything to say.
Mhm.
Yeah, you got to wait. You have to have something to say. That's different with fiction. Yeah.
Make it up.
You can make it up. Exactly. Exactly.
I hadn't thought about that though. You mentioned that the UPI wires back in the day. I mean, so you were probably very familiar with the concept of going viral before what we all now talk about going viral on the internet. Because if one of those wires got picked up worldwide, you could be read by millions of people.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I remember a friend, a colleague of mine at UPI had confused the Holy Roman Empire with the Roman Empire. And he immediately, no sooner did he file the story than the phone rang, and it was an editor at the New York Times.
No.
Sort of reaming it out for not knowing the difference between the Holy Roman Empire and the Roman Empire.
Ooh, yeah, that'd be an embarrassing way to.
It would be. Right.
So, I'm ready now, Tom. What are you working on next? Can you tell us what's coming up next for you?
Well, I'm not sure that I'm going to go back to writing novels again. I may try to turn some of my books into screenplays.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I did turn the first John Standard book. I have turned into a screenplay, but I don't know what to do with it.
Mhm.
It's not like publishing. There's people that'll pay you to read it, and they'll give you, you pay them to read it, and they give you advice. But then what do you do?
Mhm.
And it's frustrating because there's so many places that need content now with streaming and with all these streaming services and what have you. You think they'd be dying for content, but I just can't seem to break the code here and find out exactly what to do with them.
A whole different world. I wouldn't even know where to begin to try
Exactly.
to do that.
I
What was
agree.
the process for you from writing, turning a novel into a screenplay? Did you enjoy that process? How was?
Actually, I did. There's a software that you use called Final Draft.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that one. Yeah, that's a.
Yeah, it's very, very user friendly. And somebody told me, well, you just dump your book into and then that does it. Well, no, that's not what it does.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it moves pretty fast if you have a finished if you're working from an existing novel or
Mhm.
an existing book. I think it would be much more difficult if you were starting from scratch on a screenplay. But working with, I mean, I've got 9 books I can choose from. So maybe I'll spend my time doing that. It's summer here now. It's beautiful. When the rain starts coming, maybe I'll hunker down and go back to and give it another try.
Yeah, well, if you break the code and you get one of your screenplays sold, you have to come back and tell us all about it, how
I
that
would,
process worked.
believe me, nothing would make me happier.
Yeah, all right, cool. All right, Tom. So before I let you go, for listeners who want to find more about you and your books, where can they find you online?
Actually, Amazon's the best place. I do not have a website.
Okay.
And there's also the author's page on Amazon. So all the books are there. The John Standard books have been put into 2 volumes. There's the first 3 books in 1 volume and the second 2 in another volume. Northwest Noir books are still separate. And then there's Charlie. There's just finding Lexi Divine.
Okay. All right, Tom. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Well,
Really enjoyed talking to you and your process.
you're same with you. And thank you very much for taking pity on a guy who was getting scammed. I
No,
appreciate it.
yeah, no problem at all. All right. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks for listening to Meet the Thriller Author, hosted by Alan Peterson. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. It helps other thriller fans discover the show. You can find all past episodes, show notes, and author interviews at thrillerauthors.com, including conversations with icons like Dean Koontz, Frida McFadden, and Lee Child. And if you're looking for your next gripping read, check out Alan's own psychological thrillers and crime fiction novels at thrillingreads.com/books. Until next time, stay safe, keep reading, and keep the thrills coming.